The forest was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence. The kind that comes just before something impossible happens. Deep in the glade between worlds, where the trees grow sideways and flowers bloom in colors that have no names, a small figure sat cross-legged on a mushroom the size of a carriage wheel. Her hat, absurdly large, lavender and wide-brimmed, tilted at an angle that defied gravity. A tiny creature perched on her shoulder. Pix, her oldest friend, glowing with a pale, shifting light that flickered like a candle arguing with the wind. She was watching a caterpillar. She had been watching it for what mortals would call 3 hours. To her, it felt like a particularly long Tuesday. Her name was Lulu. And she was not entirely from this world, or any world that could be easily described. If you're new here, subscribe. Every week, a new League of Legends story. This one gets scribed. Stranger. Long before Lulu ever wandered into Runeterra, she was something else entirely. She was a yordle, born of that curious magical race that exists between the seen and unseen, between what is real and what might be, if you squinted just right. Yordles feel the pull of the faerie, magical realm known as Bandle City, the way humans feel the pull of sleep. Irresistible, comforting, necessary. Most yordles go home. They drift back to the soft, warm in-between and Bia. The mortal world forgets them like a half-remembered dream. Lulu didn't go home. The story of how she ended up lost between worlds is one she tells differently every time, which is either because she doesn't remember, or because she remembers too well and the truth is stranger than any version she could offer. What is known? When Lulu was very young, even by yordle standards, she encountered Pix. Pix is a faerie. Not the delicate, translucent, winged creatures of children's stories, but, even by yordles, something older and more chaotic, a being of pure wild magic that has no particular interest in being understood. Most creatures that meet Pix see something terrible in its shifting light and run. Lulu looked at Pix and saw a friend. She offered Pix a piece of mushroom. Pix apparently had been waiting centuries for someone to do exactly that. From that moment forward, they were inseparable. Pix led Lulu deeper and deeper into the fae realm, a place where time does not behave, where the rules of reality are more like polite suggestions, where a walk through the wrong patch of flowers can aid you backwards or turn your shadow into something that wants to talk. Lulu wandered those spaces for what felt to her like an afternoon. In the mortal world, decades passed without her. When she finally stepped back into Runeterra, everything was different. She was not. Here is what made Lulu genuinely dangerous. Not the magic, not the wild, crackling power that lets her reshape living things on a whim, turning charging soldiers into skittering squirrels, swelling allies to enormous size, throwing spheres of pure fey chaos that unravel careful minds. No, what made her dangerous was simpler. She did not understand why any of this was unusual. To Lulu, magic was just the way things worked if you paid attention. The world was full of possibilities. Most people just refused to see them. She had spent so long in the faerie realm that the boundary between imagination and reality had, for her, essentially dissolved. When she Satrin said she could see things others couldn't, she wasn't speaking metaphorically. She genuinely could. Pix showed her. The tiny faerie, spinning in the air beside her ear, would point out the invisible threads of possibility that hung between every moment, the shimmering potential of what could happen, what almost happened, what might still happen if someone nudged things in just the right direction. Lulu nudged things constantly. This was wonderful for anyone who needed help, and profoundly disorienting for everyone in her general vicinity. She once wandered into a Dalmatian military encampment, looking for a flower she'd been told grew only near places where strong emotions had been felt. She found the flower. She also, in the process, turned 3 soldiers into rabbits. They were being unkind to each other, caused the faerie camp's supply of grain to spontaneously begin sprouting into an impromptu garden, and had a turbiasawit 20-minute conversation with the general's horse, which she later reported had excellent opinions on the quality of the local grass. The general had her escorted from camp. She waved goodbye to the rabbits on her way out. They waved back. The question that follows Lulu everywhere, the one that soldiers and scholars and worried traveling companions ask in hushed voices, is this: does she know what she's doing? The answer is yes and no. Lulu understands, in her own way, that the world she moves through is different from the world everyone else moves through. She knows that when she polymorphs an enemy into a harmless creature, she is making a choice with real consequences. She knows that her magic shapes things, changes them in ways they did not ask for. She simply doesn't think this is a problem. In the Fae realm, transformation was the natural state of things. Nothing stayed the same. Everything was always becoming something else. The caterpillar becomes the butterfly. The acorn becomes the forest. The soldier becomes the squirrel. And then, if Lulu is feeling generous, the squirrel becomes the soldier again, more or less. Sometimes a little more squirrel than before. She doesn't think this is a tragedy. The soldier usually disagrees. What she lacks is not intelligence. In her own strange, recursive, non-linear way, Lulu is one of the sharpest minds in the known world. She speaks to Pix in a language that has no words. She, navigates the paths between worlds by intuition alone, following threads of magical resonance that trained mages would need years of study to detect. She understands the nature of the Fae in ways that even the most devoted scholars of the arcane can barely articulate. What she lacks is context. She has been away too long. The mortal world's unspoken rules, the elaborate social scaffolding of consequence, permanence, and appropriate restraint simply didn't follow her home. And so she moves through Runeterra like a force of nature that happens to be wearing a very large hat, leaving things transformed, delighted, and occasionally squirrel-shaped in her wake. It happened in a small village at the edge of the glade, on a market morning when the square was rock-sick, full, and the air smelled of bread and river water. A column of soldiers had arrived, not Demaxian, not Noxian. Mercenaries, the gray zone kind, the ones whose uniform is whatever they were paid to wear, and whose loyalty follows coin rather than flag. They were looking for something. Or someone. Their captain was the kind of man who spoke in short sentences and made them feel like commands, even when they weren't. The village had nothing to offer. The villagers made clear, as politely as terrified people can, that they had nothing of value. The captain didn't believe them. Lulu was sitting on the fountain in the center of the square, watching a pair of sparrows argue over a bread crust. She had been there since before the soldiers arrived. She was small enough, and still enough, that the soldiers had initially mistaken her for an oddly dressed child and ignored her. The captain grabbed an elderly man by the collar. Pix stilled. Lulu's head turned, very slowly, toward the captain. Her enormous hat shifted. Her eyes, wide, luminous, seeing things that were not visible to anyone else in the square, fixed on the man with the kind of attention that is somehow worse than anger. She slid off the fountain. "Excuse me," she said, in a voice like wind chimes made of something other than metal. "You're being very loud." The captain turned to look at her. He saw a tiny, oddly dressed figure with a ridiculous hat and a briolet glowing creature on her shoulder. He made the mistake of laughing. What happened next would be described differently by every witness. Some, said the captain. Beshag simply changed. Between one heartbeat and the next, he was smaller. Much smaller. His armor pooled around a shape that was no longer human. A confused tortoise blinked up at the square. From inside a pile of mercenary equipment. Some said they saw the air shimmer, gold and green and something violet, in the moment before. Some said they heard Pix make a sound that wasn't quite laughter. Lulu stood in the center of the square and looked at the tortoise thoughtfully. "He'll be fine," she said, to no one in particular. "Tortoises are very good at thinking. He might come out with better values." The remaining mercenaries looked at her. She looked back. They left. She sat back down on the fountain. The sparrows had finished their argument. The bread crust was gone. She watched where it had been for a moment, as if the empty cobblestone was still wall. Interesting. The elderly man she'd saved stood a few feet away, breathing hard, not quite sure what to say. She turned to him. Her expression was pleasant, uncomplicated. Like nothing unusual had happened, because for her, nothing had. "Did you know," she said, "that sparrows remember every person who has ever fed them? They tell each other. The whole flock knows." He stared at her. She tilted her hat. "They said you used to leave crumbs every morning. They miss that." He sat down next to her on the fountain. His hands were shaking. After a long moment, he began to laugh. "There are those in Runeterra who fear what Lulu represents. Not the power, but the philosophy. A world where anything can become anything else at any moment, where transformation is not obafuslo, the exception but the default. Where the firm lines between self and other, between what is happens and kavurk, what could be, are suggestions rather than laws. To certain kinds of minds, the ones that need to know where everything is and what it does and how it fits into the hierarchy of understood things. Lulu is a quiet catastrophe. To others, she is something else entirely. She is the reminder that the world is stranger than it appears, that beneath the organized surface of cause and effect, the fae threads still run, possibility upon possibility, each moment. Pregnant with versions of itself that most people never pause long enough to see. Pix knew this from the beginning. That's why, when a small yordle offered a piece of mushroom to a creature of pure chaotic potential, the offer was accepted. Because even chaos recognizes, in its own way, something it was waiting for. Lulu is still wandering. That is the simple, complete truth of her existence. She has no fortress, no kingdom, no agenda. That fits on a map or inside a plan. She moves through the world following Pix's light, turning left. When the magic says turn left, stopping to watch caterpillars because caterpillars deserve to be. Gantara watched. She has fought when fighting was necessary. She has protected when protection was possible. She has transformed armies and baffled generals, and left behind her a trail of confused soldiers, grateful farmers, and one particular tortoise, who may or may not be reflecting deeply on his life, choices in a garden somewhere outside the glade. She does not carry grief the way others do. She does not have the mortal relationship with loss, the permanence of it, the weight. What she has is something stranger and possibly healthier, an absolute, unshakable conviction that nothing is ever entirely over. That the end of one thing is the beginning of something she hasn't seen yet. That even the worst day is, to someone with the right eyes, the first page of an interesting story. There are scholars who study the fae, historians who try to map the spaces between worlds, mages who have devoted decades to understanding what Lulu simply is. They write long books. She watches the sparrows. Pix glows. And somewhere between the world you can see and the one you almost can, in the space where the light is a color that has no name, something like laughter echoes, small and bright and completely, wonderfully uncontainable. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new League of Legends lore video drops every week. Lulu would want you to